Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat Councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness. Just before we begin, a few pieces of housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, whose building we're using today, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. I can also draw everyone's attention to the fact this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public, of which there are, I appear, none, are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. There endeth the lesson. I just want to introduce everybody. We may know everyone, but those watching on the live stream may not. Starting with on my far left, Alison, please.
Alison Harper from Democratic Services.
And then I shall go along the back row and snake forwards. Joe.
Jo Bennett, Assistant Director, Housing Need and Supply.
Shane Galvin, Head of Housing Needs, Advice and Support.
Nicola Clanahan, Head of Housing Community Services.
Sally Scattergood, Assistant Director for Housing.
Claire Hardwick, Head of Private Sector Housing.
Sam Rickard, Housing Regulations Manager, Private Sector Housing.
Alan Denford, Finance Manager.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Adam Hardwick, Assistant Director Buildings.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
And then I will sneak this side to young Trevor over there. That's fine. Hello, my friend.
Andy Boxey, Residents Consortium.
Roman Dent, Councillor for Copner Ward.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward.
Right, thank you all for coming. We have two apologies for absence. Councillor Girarda, who's the Labour spokeswoman on housing and tackling homelessness, has sent her apologies to me and Alison. It's to deal with matters around childcare, which I think Alison and I will raise separately with the management. It is also the birthday of our Conservative Housing and Tackling Homelessness spokesman, Councillor Daniel Weems, so he's not here. So I'm sure we all wish him a very happy birthday, and I'm sure his group have sent him business cards, birthday cards, one of those two anyway. So happy birthday, Daniel. Do Ray or Cal have any interests to declare? I don't.
Personal interest in that I'm a council tenant.
That's fine, thank you for that, Cal. Raymondo?
No.
Right, good. So we will move to now the agenda. We will start with the proposal to consult on PCC's policy for allocating social housing, just so everybody knows how this works. Officers will introduce the report. I will then ask our two Residents Consortium spokespeople if they've got any comments, and then go to my Portsmouth Independent and Portsmouth Community Independent colleagues before summing up. So, Joe and Shane, please.
Thank you. So this is a report to seek permission to consult on the allocations policy, which is the policy which dictates how social housing is allocated in the city, both for Portsmouth City Council tenancies and tenancies of registered providers of social housing. It's recommended that a formal consultation take place to understand the requirements of an effective allocations policy, which would seek the views of private registered providers in the city, local residents likely to be affected by the scheme, including current households who are on the waiting list for social housing, members of the Portsmouth City Rough Sleeping Homeless Partnership Group, and other partner organisations likely to be affected by any changes. It's suggested that the consultation would run from around 14th of May to the 24th of June, with officers reviewing the current policy in the meantime. The outcome of that review and consultation would then be brought back along with any proposed changes to said policy. Just by way of background, the council is required to have an allocations policy under section 166 capital A of Housing Act 1996, and Portsmouth City Council's policy was last reviewed in 2019, primarily to take effect of the recently passed homelessness legislation, which was enacted a year before that. Since then, the housing situation in Portsmouth has changed significantly, with much greater levels of homelessness, and that having an associated impact on the makeup of the housing register, to the extent that the majority of households rehoused through the housing register are now homeless households, whereas the register itself is only made up of a relatively small portion of those households. This means the majority of houses that become available and flats that become available go to those in the high urgent band, with very few properties going to anybody in the low and medium bands of priority. Further, this was an action set by the recently published homelessness strategy, which undertook to review how social housing is allocated in the city, including a review of the allocation policy for social housing and its relationship with homelessness. The proposed areas of focus for the review would be the relationship between homelessness and the housing register, including the correct level of priority to be awarded. It would include the number of properties that are returned to the housing register for allocation from transfer applicants, with specific attention given to larger properties which we know to be in short supply in the city. It would focus on the need to make the best possible use of the finite resources available, and consider the labelling of the priority bands, with particularly focus on the perception of the low level of priority and medium level of priority labels. It would focus on the residency criteria for the register and how that relates to the council's performance of the Armed Forces Covenant, and would also consider the direct nominations agreements the council has with partner organisations for vulnerable households who are offered direct nominations for tenancies. And on completion of that review and consultation, we'll return our findings to this setting.
Okay, thank you for that, Shane. Residents Consortium colleagues, any questions or comments? Feel free.
No, not at this time. I don't think there's anything. Am I right in thinking that most of our homeless are now actually put into hostels, i.e. the registry, places like that?
So we have got a split between planned temporary accommodation and unplanned temporary accommodation. Most of those who are found to be in priority need and given temporary accommodation aren't in places like the Registry, Elm and Kingsway. That's our rough sleeping pathway. So our rough sleeping pathway centres around those who are non-priority and who we don't have a statutory requirement to house. We do, however, have a number of standalone complete accommodation, so flats that we've used for temporary accommodation, buildings that we've purchased for temporary accommodation, things like that. What we try and do is to expand the planned accommodation, so we have a very limited reliance on bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation, but unfortunately, because of the level of demand, we do also have to rely on that.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Thank you for that. Just to say that there are bits of the homelessness legislation that can best be described as nuts. And they have a distinction between people who sleep on the streets, who may not always, we have a legal duty to house, and those that we do. And those that we don't have, we are told we don't have a legal duty to house, are called in law non-priority homeless. This is what can best be described as immoral and inhumane, but it's legislation that we have to work within. So that explains the difference. What we're trying to do is to create one homelessness team and one homelessness approach, because nobody knows the difference, and they shouldn't. So that's why the words non-priority are used. They're not our words, they're the words of the legislation that we have to work with. Sorry. Anything else, Trevor?
Thank you. A couple of points. Regarding the homelessness, which was mentioned that it has increased significantly, what's the thoughts behind that, why it's gone up so much? I mean, I have a view, but what's the council's view?
So within our homelessness strategy, which we recently brought forward, you will have seen the causes of homelessness listed. So, and within the strategy, we look to work on the top 5 causes of homelessness. The top 5 stay fairly constant. So they are familial evictions or no longer being able to stay with friends and family, private rented sector, domestic abuse, relationship breakdown, those sorts of things sit at the root cause. The causes haven't changed. What has changed is the volume.
Sorry, can I come back on that? Is it a worrying volume?
Yes.
Right.
I'm sorry, okay. Joe has to give a politically impartial answer. Luckily, I don't have to bother. No. So, homelessness is going up across the country. I was going to say this in my summing up, but you've answered a fair point. Homelessness is going up across the country, whether that's people sleeping on the streets or people that we have a legal duty to house. As Joe says, the causes are the same, but the volume, which is occurring across the country, is down to a whole series of factors related to the cost of living crisis. I don't want to do 20 minutes on exactly all the factors related to the cost of living crisis, but it is related to that. And it's really worrying, and I think councillors of all political stripes, colours, Uncle Tom Cobbley, whatever, have complained to the government to ask for changes. Some changes have occurred, but we're worried that that won't be carried through as we go forwards. So it's forwards cost of living crisis.
Okay. Thank you. And my other point is that are you... or is anyone concerned that the current allocations policy is just outdated or not fit for purpose, which is why this is now being reviewed?
No, so we've already started looking at the policy, and one of the things that we found, for example, is that the bandings and those that sit within them feel right. They aren't giving us a particular problem. What we do have to do is to shift to looking at the issue that presents us, which is the level of demand. So it isn't that it isn't fit for purpose, it's that it isn't doing everything we would like it to, and we want the policy to be able to do more. So we're looking to expand and to change as time and demand has changed with us. So it feels like the right time to review it. It doesn't feel out of date and like it isn't working at the moment. What it isn't doing is meeting the demand that we've got in front of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all right, Treasurer. Thank you for that. Ray.
No, all the questions I've had have already been answered. Thank you.
Blimey, anyone think there's rehearsals in this meeting? I'll tell you, there aren't. Cal.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, not too much to say on this. I guess it's useful to go and review policies and processes every so often and go out for consultation on how they might be improved. So it's good to see that's happening. The only question I've got, I guess, is around the use of technology as part of the process. I know that other local authorities, for example, opt to use online systems to help process their allocations, choice-based letting systems. And I know there's going to be pros and cons to that versus our current approach. I guess my question there is, are we looking at that? Is that kind of under review as part of this? And it'd be useful from my perspective just to understand whether that's now or outside of this meeting, what the kind of relative pros and cons are of that approach. One pro I can immediately think of is giving people that choice. It helps kind of hopefully avoid issues further down the line. I'd imagine probably a fair amount of time of the people that work in housing options, and certainly a bit of our time as wards councillors, is people who have been offered properties, but it's not the block they want, or there's a reason they can't live in their area, etc., etc., and then that creates an issue which needs to be resolved. Obviously, it seems to me that choice-based letting systems may avoid that issue, but it may create lots of other issues. But yeah, I guess the point I'm making is it'd just be useful just to see that kind of relative comparison, just to understand that the system we're using is the best one for us to continue using moving forward. Linked to that, and on the topic of technology, aside, assuming we don't go down a choice-based letting system approach, I wonder if it's ever been considered some kind of online system where people can access their record in relation to their housing application. For example, what bands they're in, what kind of property they're being considered for, what areas they're being considered for. Again, thinking of trying to reduce workloads, because I know a lot of work, it seems from my perspective, goes into responding to kind of routine inquiries on that basis from people who just want to clarify simple things that perhaps they could just log in and see.
No, thanks. That's very helpful. I know that Liberal Democrats and Albans does something quite similar to that second point in their housing system. I've also been in a council that's done choice-based letting, so we'll have a chat about that later. Joe or Shane, did you want to? Who's going to come back? It's James. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to start. I think, so the short answer is it isn't directly in scope, because what you're being asked to consider is the policy. The tools with which the team use and/or applicants access the system would be separate. But you've just launched a homelessness strategy. I guess it's within the scope and bandwidth of the partnership to consider the points Cal's making, including all of the available tools. There's some really good points there, and we do hear from residents themselves phoning us that they could possibly avoid that call if they could access the system itself. As Cal rightly says, there are some clear pros and cons to choice-based letting systems, which we would need to carefully consider, but certainly in scope as part of the homeless strategy work. Not directly as part of the allocation policy, but the tools that lie beyond it for sure.
Thanks for that, James. Does that sort of answer your does that answer your questions? I'm sorry, I wasn't being blunt, Cal. Thank you very much for all that. Again, and thanks for all those comments. I think Cal's points are quite fair. I think that one of the reasons that we're looking at this review, I mean, I think all of us as councillors get casework from time to time, people who want to move. And it's always tough. Particularly, I mean, I've got one person who I spoke to, who I've been dealing with this morning, not in my ward, who, understandably, for a whole raft of very valid reasons, wants to go somewhere, and has said to me, oh, by the way, a friend of mine has just got to move and she's in the same band I have. This is a two-phase system. This is a two-tier system. So I think it's time that we do actually review this, partly because I've had concerns for a while about the allocation system and how it actually meets the current situation we're in. So I'm pleased we're actually having a consultation rather than actually telling people what to do, because I think that's right. And I think points like technology and everything else is a good point going forwards. But I do think it's overdue that we look at this. It is part of the homelessness strategy, partly because we need to look at reality now as opposed to 5 years ago. So I'm happy around the consultation. I know the consultation says around the 14th of May. If it could be ideally starting earlier than the 14th of May, that would be very, very useful, would be my humble suggestion, which I look forward to seeing. But yeah, just so we can get it all done and dusted quite quickly, and then we can actually get a policy in place quite quickly so people know where they're going. But again, it's down to there's not enough homes and too many people wanting them. It's as simple as that. And despite our best efforts to change that, that's still true. So I'm happy to agree the consultation, and we look forward to seeing the outcome ASAP after the 24th of June. Okay, thank you for that. Now, second item, update on our preparedness for the Social Housing Regulation Act and Building Safety Act. Nicola.
Thank you. As you say, this is a report which provides an update of our preparedness for the Social Housing Regulation Act and Building Safety Act. Following the tragic fire at Grenfell, the government published the Charter for Social Housing Residents in November 2020. In July 2023, the Social Housing Regulation Act became law. This, alongside the Building Safety Act and Fire Safety Act, represent a significant step towards shaping a new era for the social housing sector. Under the new regime, the housing regulator has strengthened powers and can proactively intervene where landlords are performing poorly on consumer issues and conduct routine inspections to investigate issues. The regulator has amended its consumer standards to meet expanded objectives, which landlords will be required to comply with from April 2024. The building safety regulator also has additional powers and regulates high-rise residential buildings. For Portsmouth and all registered providers, these regulatory changes mean proactively taking steps to ensure compliance with the revised standards and being able to evidence compliance and ensure the safety of our high-rise residential buildings. We have a culture of putting residents' voices at the heart of what we do, having adopted a business model that ensures residents' voices are front and centre over 15 years ago, and a well-established resident engagement team. The report sets out the steps that we've taken since the publication of the Charter and our preparatory work for increased regulation and inspection. which includes the introduction of tenancy update visits, the creation and recruitment to additional posts, and the review of policies, many of which represented a local authority-wide approach. However, we've needed to set those terms out in a very landlord-specific terms. Revised policies are attached to the report, which include the building safety engagement strategy, the tenancy policy, safeguarding policy, domestic abuse policy, and our resident engagement approach with the 3-year plan. The report also references the collation of our tenant satisfaction measures and a new communication and engagement strategy alongside the work that has been completed in response to the Building Safety Act and Fire Act. Over the last 18 months, we've asked a lot from our resident representatives from the resident consortium and focus groups, and we're extremely grateful to them for volunteering their time and experiences and working alongside us. Their views and the views of the wider resident community have helped shape our responses to government consultations on the proposed regulatory changes, informed our communication and engagement strategy, including the work on our revised website and our House Talk magazine. They've helped us in building the approach to our tenant perception survey, informed and reviewed policies and strategies, and have even assisted in the recruitment to our Assistant Director post for housing and the Assistant Director for buildings, ensuring that those responsible for leading the work have residents' interests at heart. Together with residents, we have created a foundation on which we can now build, and work will continue in response to the changing landscape and new measures that are being introduced.
Thank you for that, Nicola. Residents Consortium colleagues, any comments at all?
Excuse me, just to say really that, you know, a lot of the issues that have come up, I've been quite happy to give opinions to and to shape it, and I'm really pleased with how things are going.
Okay, I think the team will clock that as a comment. Cal, did you have anything at all? Questions or comments? I don't mind.
Again, not too much on this. I think it's all relatively straightforward, kind of putting into place the requirements of various legislation. I guess just a brief comment on tenant satisfaction measures and the risk, I guess, that these become the new league tables and are used to compare different housing authorities, and they're focusing on one particular aspect of the service and not taking a more kind of holistic understanding of how services are being delivered. But I'm sure that's a risk kind of we're all aware of and keen to guard against. But yeah, on the whole, very happy with the rest of the report. Thanks.
Thanks, Cal. I may return to that when it comes to be my turn. Nicola, did you have any particular comments about any puffs of smoke from government as to whether they're going to use it as sort of, you know, promotion of relegation tables or anything like that?
I think what they've said is that they will set out the results, but not in league tables. So that's not their intention. They will just publish the results, and it's for transparency and information for residents to be able to access to know how their landlord is performing. How other people use that information, we'll yet to find out.
So in other words, everyone else will. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Ray, did you have any comments at all?
No, I'm fine on this one.
That's lovely. Thank you for that. Firstly, just to pick up on Cal's point, I have as much cynicism as you do, I suspect, around league tables and all those sorts of things, and not understanding different circumstances and such. We disagree on the decent home standard, but I view it in very much the same league. And having gone to a council and said, you know, we don't do the decent home standard, and then to be told we do and we're still worse than you, was one of my more embarrassing 20 minutes of having to explain it. But I think you're right. Different councils have different approaches, and I'm concerned that this will be seen as a league table. I understand why, because of the horror of Grenfell, whereby residents essentially told Kensington and Chelsea that people were going to have to die before anything else was going to change, which is a shocking and horrific state of affairs. And so a lot of this is after the horse has bolted, unfortunately. But we have to do that. And I'm already pleased that we are conducting surveys and checking to see what our tenant management lists are like. I know there'll be some organisations that believe in a North Korean approach of 99.9% of tenants are happy, therefore everyone is happy, and we'll try and avoid that where we can. But I'm delighted that we're being proactive again rather than waiting, as the government did for too long. So again, I'm happy to approve this report. Okay, item 3 on the agenda is PCC's tenancy strategy 2024 to 2029. We're not going for 2030, it would appear, or the 5-year plan. So again, I have Joe and Shane down to do this.
Thank you. This one's going to be me. So with this, so we're presenting the tenancy strategy, which is an approach to tenancies for all registered providers of social housing across the city, including local authority housing as a registered provider. Sorry, I apologise. We have appended the strategy for 24 to 29 to be effective from the 1st of April 24. The Cabinet member is asked to note that this publication of the tenancy strategy doesn't constitute a major change to the existing tenancy strategy, and the change to this strategy remove one reference to local authority housing as a registered provider, allowing for the publication of the local lettings policy. Which is a local authority housing policy, making this a specific policy of the statutory authority and relevant to all registered providers. The Cabinet member is asked to note that there are no changes to the strategy which impact registered providers within the city, and accordingly the strategy is not to be consulted on, although copies of the published strategy will be shared with the registered providers, and this will be discussed at our standard meeting with them, whereby we explain changes to our policies and our procedures. The current strategy expires in 2024 and required updating at this time, the rationale is that we need to have this strategy to inform all practice across all registered providers.
Okay, thank you for that, Joe. Residents Consortium colleagues, any comments at all?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
No, Trevor, you all right?
Yeah, no comment.
That's right, I didn't want you to feel left out, that's all. That's very kind. Ray? No? Cal?
Yeah, I've got a few quick questions just about the policy, I guess, and how it's been implemented in the city. The first one is with regards to the section where it talks about the local housing allowance and the expectation that housing associations won't charge above that in their rent levels. I know that in the past that's not always been the case, so just curious to know what the current position is. Are there still some housing associations who are exceeding the local housing allowance? Secondly, there's a reference, I think, to deposits that housing associations are not expected to require deposits from incoming tenants. I know in the past there's been issues with not deposits as such, but rent up front. So some housing associations requiring a month's rent up front before someone moves in, or a couple of weeks, which quite often is a significant amount of money that people struggle to get together. So again, just curious what the current position is in terms of how that's playing out. And then lastly, I think there's a reference also to fixed term tenancies. So I know that a couple of years ago there was a move on some of the larger housing associations having gone down that route back towards kind of lifetime tenancies. So again, just a question about what the current kind of state of play is and how widely these are being used, or if other people have kind of followed the trend, hopefully, to move away from them back towards the lifetime tenancies.
Thanks for that, Cal. Joe and Shane, any comments on that?
So whilst we set this out as our expectation, RPs are able to make decisions about how they act, and they are able to act in different ways, particularly with different forms of rented accommodation. We think it's important to have a strong policy that sets out where we would hope that they would be, and we meet with them regularly to explain our view and to discuss matters. We have recently had a request from someone wishing to charge more than local housing allowance, and we made our views known and they haven't done that, so that's a positive. I think we need to be very collaborative with our registered providers. We need to work with them and explain why we're doing these things, and we need to hope that that continued engagement will elicit the actions that we're looking for here. With regard to rents in advance, I think you know my view, and we do have the capacity within the service to deal with that when we need to ensure that it doesn't prevent someone from taking occupancy. We do also, though, work to alleviate those issues, and we are clear that an allocation needs to be accepted if it's an appropriate allocation, and we'll work with providers to make sure that they take that when we're making it. With regard to, I'm sorry, I've had a complete
The last one was fixed-term tenancies.
Thank you, Cal. On the third one, fixed-term tenancies, our understanding is that the take-up is fairly low, and what we have seen is fixed-term tenancies used in very specific circumstances where it feels like a very sensible thing to be doing. In general, though, we of course approve of the greatest length of security that someone can have, and again, you know my views on that, so I don't think they'll be surprising.
Does that answer your questions
great,
and comments,
thank you.
Cal? That's very kind of you. I think the answer in terms of things like rents and advances, we don't like them much. I think that's a reasonable estimate. Oh, Nicola, hello.
Hello. I just wanted to draw attention to the new neighbourhood and community standards that's being introduced by the regulator, which places an additional expectation on all social housing providers to work in partnership with the local authority and have stronger regard to the policies set down.
Which may or may not happen. I think that's fair. Okay, thank you for that, colleagues. Again, I think this seems like a tidying up exercise, but it does raise some issues along the way. We obviously are about to take, from Monday, this council is about to take over 800 registered provided housing properties. And so, you know, we will find out eventually what their rents look like. So there's a pertinent issue for us. One of the safeguards that we as an administration are very keen to do is to make sure that no rent is above the local housing allowance level. And we've held that despite the fact it's been shamefully frozen for the last few years. Hopefully, the next government will see some sense and actually increase it, but who knows? That's not our planet. I think the other thing that intrigues me is what if certain aspects of governmental policy change? So, for instance, things like affordable rents, which is deemed in planning as 80% of the market rent, which is not affordable in the city, move and stuff like that. How flexible is our strategy in terms of adapting to those external changes, Joe? And Shane?
I think affordable or social, the local housing allowance, allowing things to be affordable for tenants is the key point, and that's why we focus on that. Affordable rent, many providers will charge what they consider to be an affordable rent, which isn't 80% of market, but it is above social. And what we've seen across providers is actually very reasonable rent setting. Pleasantly surprised, I have to be honest, in most cases. I think some of the bigger problems come in those intermediate products, which are not social, not market, somewhere in between, and they can prove an affordability issue. As you know, the housing needs team has money advisors within the frontline team to ensure that we understand affordability of tenancy and that we take that into consideration. And if we see any dramatic change there, we will keep you abreast of those changes.
I think that'll be useful. I mean, the truth is we'll probably know through the press anyway, and possibly through something called a manifestos later on this year about what might be going on, but I just think it's useful to be flexible just in case the circumstances get better or worse. But with that tidy up and those requests to talk to our housing association colleagues about making sure everything's fine, I'm okay to approve this strategy, Alison. Okay, next up is Steve, who will talk about something very important, which is damp and mould. Steve.
Thank you. Yes, so the purpose of the report is to update members of a review that we've done on the processes for managing damp and mould in council properties and seek approval to implement a new damp and mould policy. So obviously, as you're aware, the profile for damp and mould has increased and recognise the very serious harm that can come from living with untreated damp and mould. And so alongside the regulator has made various sort of we've responded to the regulator over time, but part of that for us was to set up a damp and mould safety group that was set up to review our damp and mould processes, how we manage damp and mould, and to look at the proposed policy that we would like to recommend to implement. The Damp and Mould Safety Group has updated the existing damp and mould leaflets and the website and looked at the information that we provide to our residents, including arranging for a damp and mould video to be produced that is about to be published. For landlords, it is important that we act promptly to protect our tenants' health, and the government has issued various guidance and alongside the Ombudsman about how local authorities should manage damp and mould, and we've taken those factors into account when we've put together our damp and mould policy. So the policy itself outlines our responsibilities as a landlord, and a key factor of it is to ensure that we undertake property inspections within 14 days of it being reported by a resident. And from our point of view, it's important that we investigate and diagnose the cause of damp and deliver effective solutions that deal with that actual cause. And the policy sort of includes a hierarchy of remedial action that will assist in the management of damp and mould cases and how we diagnose that. And that is there to assist our surveyors and our management team to know how to actually escalate the actions that we may or may not take when we're investigating damp and mould. The other, another factor of the policy, it sort of outlines that we will follow up each completed damp and mould repair within 6 months to ensure that the actions that we have taken have been effective and that we have resolved the issue. And it also, the policy also outlines resident responsibilities within it with regard to damp and mould, and that is around ensuring that residents do report any evidence so that we can investigate them, and also allowing access for remedial works to be undertaken. The policy also talks about the advice that we can provide, and we have updated our condensation and mould advice for Portsmouth City Council leaflet that is attached to the report. And also we've reviewed and updated how we will record instances of damp and mould on our repairs and maintenance database. And that will enable us periodically to evaluate repairs and stock data, evaluates things such as the energy performance certificate, so that we can be, the key to that is about us being really more proactive in terms of the properties that we may target to do more regular condition surveys, or also to engage with residents where perhaps it has been identified that there's a more likelihood that damp and mould may occur. And also it will inform our asset management strategy and plan programmes. So it will be by reviewing the data that we collect, we will be able to utilise and identify properties that may need to be included into any sort of plan maintenance schemes that may address some of the damp and mould causes. And a key factor as well for us is, and certainly in terms of our engagement across the service and other services, is about utilising every opportunity that we have when we're visiting a resident in their property to identify damp and mould, so that we can make sure that we are responding to that quickly and addressing the root causes. So in terms of consultation and engagement, as I said, the Damp and Mould Safety Group is representative of across HMB, so all the different services are involved in that group. We've also liaised directly with the Assistant Director of Public Health, and they have offered support in terms of training and how they can help us pull together that training and give advice. We've consulted with a resident consortium in October, and alongside this as well, we've had an internal audit of undertaking an audit on our processes for damp and mould. That was completed in November. That identified some exceptions, but all of those exceptions would be addressed by adopting this policy. So that would be a positive aspect of that. And then alongside this also, the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel has been reviewing local authority and landlords in the city response to damp and mould in the social housing and private sector. An initial feedback from that scrutiny panel is, for HMB to really continue widely promoting and raising the awareness of damp and mould. But whilst the final report has not been completed at the time of writing our report, we will obviously further review that report and update our policy as appropriate, or our approach, once the report has been published. So in terms of implementation, we'll continue with the different communication channels for promoting a damp and mould, what residents should do if they identify it. So it's important that they know when to report it and the importance of reporting it, but also to give them advice around how they can help manage some of those factors such as condensation. The repair surveyors have already been using the guidance and the approach for this last sort of winter. So there's some learning that we can do from that to make sure we go forward on that. And we've also started to pull together damp and mould specific measures into a dashboard. And that'll help us do that sort of initial analysis of how are we performing in terms of our response to damp and mould, but also that bit of trying to identify what properties are more prone to damp and mould, so that we can start to target those, either to do condition surveys or to start looking at sort of what sort of plan schemes or proactive work that we can do to address it. So the damp and mould safety group will continue to have oversight of the process, continue to review performance measures and feedback from complaints. And as I said earlier, we're doing the final amendments to the video that we hope to publish shortly. And alongside that, we're also looking at posters that we can put into the notice boards in particular blocks, where again they're more prone to perhaps having damp and mould, so that residents are really aware of when to look out for these factors and when to sort of report these to our repairs support team. And then finally, the damp and mould group, we're aware that there are further discussions going on about legislation and targets, and we will keep an eye on that guidance and those targets with such things as decent homes or wherever that comes through. And we will obviously then review our own policy in light of any changes that come through in the future. So the recommendation is that for approval of the damp and mould policy. So any questions, really? Thank you.
And thank you for that, Steve. Residents Consortium colleagues, any questions or comments at all?
No, I think any questions I had have been answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Trevor?
Sorry, yes. First of all, I think your group has got a very difficult job to do. I mean, damp and mould penetration appears to be one of those things that sort of saying, well, we're going to get in any way we can. What is the response from tenants when you go in and you advise them on improving situations to help, and then you have to go back 3 months, 4 months later, and they haven't done the things that you advised on?
Yeah, I think so. I think damp and mould, as you quite rightly say, is a complex issue, and there's a lot of factors that can contribute to that. And I think the important bit from the policy that we're recommending approval is that bit of follow-up, and it is about us working with the residents, understanding what those issues are. So for instance, looking at what other support we can provide. So for instance, some of that might be about, our advice sometimes will be about heating a property to the right temperature. So if we understand that there's an issue when we do those follow-ups, we can then make those links to Switch on Portsmouth to give sort of advice about energy saving measures and making sure they're on the right tariffs and such like that, such things as that. It is about that. The key for us is that follow-up. The key is that we also are looking at not just the resident factors, but the building fabric factors. And I think, some of the stereotypical approach it's a resident lifestyle thing. And I think that's key, that we're going in there to really understand that root cause, and work with the residents and just focus primarily on the building, but also make sure that we're doing that education with the residents as well.
Actually, James wanted to come back on your first point, and then feel free to ask the next one, if that's all right. James.
Sorry, James. I didn't
No,
see
not
it.
at all. I just wanted to compliment what Steve said and just emphasise that key point, which is that this is about a surveyor visiting the property and having a face-to-face conversation with the tenant. I think that's really important. It's not a response where the tenant's calling us or being referred to a website and we're simply sending a leaflet with advice. This is about going into the property, talking to the tenant, explaining the situation. And as Steve said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So in some instances, we will be advising tenants that some of their practice is causing some of the issues. The classic is a tumble dryer that's venting within the property, for example. In the main, I would say most people are happy to receive the advice, but it's that face-to-face that's really important, and that underpins this particular policy.
Thank you.
Trevor, your second point, please.
Yeah, quite a few years ago, I used to run a small building company that used to do grant work for PCC. And one of the problems that we found was, and I've mentioned this before, because of the older stock of housing in Portsmouth, a lot of the problems were down to block cavities. Is that something you can pick up fairly easily, or is that a bit of a challenge for you?
No, you're quite right, and I think so. I think I alluded to in the report that we have started to, with the measures, start to understand, try and have a better understanding of what top property types are more prone to damp and mould, and you're quite right that our acquired houses are a sector that are more prone to that. And some of that can be to do with that construction because they are sort of pre-war construction. In terms of picking out those sort of things up, we are starting to look at sort of technology and looking at apps and how we can do thermal imaging, which can identify where some of those sort of blockages are. And obviously the more basic bit of that is opening up cavities. And you're quite right. We did find it a few years ago when we had the really extreme wet weather, although looking at today it's a bit like that, but you're quite right that we did find instances where we were having particular problems where it was about block cavities, or it was about cavity wall insulation hadn't been perhaps installed quite as it would be now, because the regulations of how that's installed has differed over time. So you're quite right, but I think the bit I suppose to emphasise from the policy is about a surveyor going there with an open mind about what the causes are and using that skill and knowledge really to look at all the different factors and not just dismiss it on a first call. And I think that's a little bit where like that hierarchy is about helping as well, because sometimes that's about, we're not going to go into every single property and jump to the top bit of maybe suggesting that we need to do a planned scheme, for instance. That would be not proportionate, but it is about going through that hierarchy and understanding actually it is a process of elimination very often, and looking at all the different causes that potentially are contributing to that damp and mould.
Thank you for that, Trevor. Cal?
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, another good report. It's encouraging to see this coming forward. I think clearly there's been a big change in approach over the last couple of years across the sector to damp and mould issues, and I think something that needed to happen. I think too many times serious issues were just dismissed as kind of lifestyle problems, etc. Not particularly by PCC, but generally across the sector. So I think this kind of renewed focus and change in approach is good. I think in particular, something that I'll come across in terms of casework is, I guess it would be the same with yourself and others, is that we get the cases that don't get resolved at the first time. So if someone has damp mould and they're able to resolve it, there's one repair that's sorted, we don't hear about it. We hear about the ones that it keeps coming back and it's getting worse, etc. I'm actually recently dealing with one, and it was good to see that the parts of this policy are already being put into place, in particular the kind of clear escalation process for different stages, so that whether you have got those repeat cases that are getting worse or aren't getting resolved, there is a clear kind of process for that being escalated and new measures being brought into place. So I think that's something in the policy that's of particular use. Just a quick question in terms of the dashboard data. Let me just find it. I've lost it on my computer, but I think in Q3 2023 there's a big spike. I was just curious whether that's something to do with the reporting or bringing in a new system, or was there kind of a factor behind that?
I think, if memory serves me right, it's one of the appendices in this report, yes. That quarter is the first time that the details around this will go to the Governance, Audits and Standards Committee of this council as a way of being open about things. So this is actually quite important because this will crop up in 2 or 3 places and no doubt be asked in 2 or 3 places. Steve?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination. Probably is so we introduced those keywords only this year to be able to monitor that, but also that third quarter, if you like, is the season when it is more prevalent in terms of our demand. So certainly from sort of October onwards, that is when we get the most calls, certainly from our repairs. I know that from our demand that we see from our repair surveyors, that is an area that they're primarily focused on. And that is the time of year when we're sort of gearing up more to do a lot more of those sort of visits. But that's not to say that, you know, damp and mould couldn't occur all through the year. But obviously in that third quarter it is when it is most primarily the highest demand.
Does that answer your question in a comment? If not, carry on.
Yeah, no, it answers that one. Just one last question. I know it's referenced in the report, but just curious to kind of hear a bit more of the detail of where there are issues in a property and it's perhaps something structural to do with the block, or perhaps there's issues in several properties within the block, what the kind of process is then for looking at the block as a whole and doing those kind of deeper investigations.
Yeah, I think so as I've sort of put in the report ready, we're at the early stages of doing that analysis. We're starting to identify some trends, certainly with acquired properties and concrete ring beams. So I think there's twofold approach to that really. Is A, with that knowledge, we can be a lot more proactive engaging with those residents in those blocks, and also in terms of the condition surveys, that would definitely be a more of a primary focus for us doing those condition surveys that we're certainly ramping up. And then ultimately, that is knowledge and information that will then inform our plan programmes and link into some of the other work streams that we need to do, and may help us in terms of how we prioritise which blocks we're going to focus on. But it is quite early stages at this stage really, and the first bit is about making sure we're gathering the data and understanding what some of those issues are.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks. Ray, you chair the housing scrutiny panel that was mentioned earlier on. I don't want you to feel that this is somehow disrespecting the work you're doing, because we're basically, this is what we're going to do. But I think I've been very grateful to you and the rest of the panel for your work, and it's infected, that's the wrong verb to use. It's had a major impact on what we're trying to do, so we're very grateful to the panel as a whole, Ray.
I've just got a couple of quick questions. Firstly, I'd like to thank Steve and his team for the work they've done in the back for the security panel. It's been very enlightening. First question, the booklet, which I think is excellent for a start, will that be going out to every council tenant, or will it be either source name? And the training of officers, has this started or is it about to start?
So if I start with the first bit about the leaflets, so the leaflets are there for all of our staff when they're doing home visits and giving out advice. So it's not gone out on block. That said, is something that's going to be part of the pack for the residents that come over for Clarion. So it will be part of that pack, and the information is on the website as well in that leaflet form. And we have and will continue to do sort of regular articles in House Talk about damp and mould, so that will get out to all of those residents periodically to remind people, particularly when we're coming up to the sort of season when we get the biggest demand, to make sure people are aware of how to report it. and what advice we can give them. And with regard to the training, that hasn't started across the board. I mean, discussions at the moment with our learning and development team about doing the module on that, and engaging, but with other parts of the service about developing that training. So yeah, that hasn't actually started. Apart from obviously, we've done quite a lot of work with our surveying team. And giving them the guidance to make sure that they're fully briefed. So even though the policy's not been approved, we've been following that process up to now for this last sort of 3 or 5 or 6 months really, and following that process and using that hierarchy as Cal alluded to.
Darren, could I just come back on that?
Yes, of course you can.
And just to add, so when we talk about the training, we're mainly focusing on the training for the wider organisation. So our own teams that are out visiting, they have been briefed on this new process. So as Steve says, surveyors, housing officers are also aware of this new process and had that briefing. What we're developing is a more formal training course that we can roll out to the wider organisation. And for our new starters as they join, it will be part of that induction process that they all go through. And in terms of the leaflets, as Steve said, we're getting that out through, as we sign up new tenants, it's included in that pack as well. And if any tenants request it, or if we have a conversation with them about it, they're receiving a damp and mould leaflet as we go as well. And we've also done a piece, as Steve said, in House Talk recently as well.
And I will come back to that particular point when I come to my summing up, Ray. Thank you for that. What was your other point or other points you wanted to raise?
It was more the fact that it was both questions were, I knew the answers already, but it was for everyone here.
You've been in far too many meetings, Ray, I tell you. Was that all your points? Was it? That's lovely. Thank you very much for that. And I want to start with the points that have been raised. It's absolutely crucial that this is not just within the housing service, but everybody who walks in to any of our housing blocks, whether that's people in social care, children and adults, whether that's people in environmental issues and everything else like that. It is absolutely crucial that everybody knows. It's not just one person's problem. I think that the reason we're here, and the report is incredibly polite about the reasons we're here, are because that didn't happen. The reason we're here is because a coroner in Rochdale found that an infant had died as a result of damp and mould, and basically told the government, what on earth are you going to do about it? And coroners have that power, and that's why the government's been scrambling around trying to find a solution ever since. But I'm pleased that we have a pretty comprehensive package, and again, encouraging openness by going through the Governance and Audit Committee as well, to tell people how many properties there are. I know I had a letter from the MP for Portsmouth South about a year ago from that, for which I was very grateful, and I was pleasantly surprised at how few serious complaints there had been around damp and mould. And it is really important, because if we want to keep our tenants safe, these are the people who pay everybody's wages in here. It is absolutely crucial that they are entitled to as safe a life as possible. So I'm pleased, finally, that things are moving, and I'm delighted that we're being proactive. Some of Trevor's points are very, very fair, and I think they need to be taken seriously. Some of the blocks simply weren't built for things like this, particularly the 50s and the 60s. That's why we're doing an asset management strategy overseen by Adam and Steve to actually try and work out what we need to do and where we need to go. That's not partly down to part of the issue is money, because as we've seen before, we're facing a major cash crunch in 3 or 4 years' time if we're not careful through depreciation. It's also about making sure those blocks are fit for the future. So those points, I think, are fair. Again, I'm very grateful to the scrutiny panel for its comments, and I think one of the other things going forwards is obviously that relationship between people who think they've done everything when they haven't. We've all, as councillors, I'm sure, had cases whereby somebody swears blind they've done everything they can to deal with it, and they haven't. And it's trying to make sure the team and other people within the organisation treat those cases as sensitively as possible, and have, as Carol said, a clear process whereby everybody knows where they're going. Because when nobody knows where they're going, everybody else feels upset, and therefore there is distrust. The other issue we've got going forwards for the blocks, obviously, is taking on the new Clarion homes from Monday. and obviously trying to work through that, which I know the team has already started to do. There is going to be at least 3 houses where there's a problem. And I hope we've got a process in place to make sure that happens, because we need to deal with those going forwards. But all in all, this is a pretty comprehensive approach. The situation is quite good as far as the local authority is concerned with regards to this situation, but one person with damp and mould is one person too many. And that's why this process is in place, and I'm delighted that we're being proactive. It's just a shame others haven't been in the past. So that's another lesson ended, and with that, Alison, I'm happy to... oh, hello. You nearly got me there, Trevor.
Very quick point. I mentioned to yourself at a different group meeting, and the fact that you've referred to the coroner in Rochdale, I'm sure most of us have seen on television these groups of lawyers who want to take a claim, or take it through court to get a claim. I just think we need to be very careful of that. We don't know whether they're going to succeed and whether the court system will allow them to progress their claim. But, you know, it seems to me a major problem comes up. I hope there's no lawyers in the room. A group of lawyers get together and they start ambulance chasing. I'm sure we are aware of that.
Yes, is the actual answer to your question. Yeah. I'll expand a bit. This isn't new. What you're saying is not new. No. One of the problems the public sector, I mean, this is a personal opinion, but one of the problems the public sector has faced is trying to respond to that group of people which has been imported from America. And that has led, in my view, to excessive caution within the public sector, because, frankly, they're all scared they're going to get a claim from someone. It's going to be in the paper and they've got to do something. And it's how we balance that. But that doesn't negate the real issues that have been faced and the real flaws that have occurred, which led to a coroner basically telling the government they had to do something, which legally they can do. I think we're in a good place as a local authority with regards to that. It won't be perfect. There will be someone, and it'll be in the papers, and it'll be on social media, and that is unfortunately life. But it is an issue that this council, for other reasons, is quite aware of. So the straight answer is yes, but I thought you deserved a more of an explanation behind that one-word answer. Is that right, Trevor? And now I think I can approve. There's no need to apologise. It's all right, it's a fair point. But now I think I can approve the damp and mould policy. And now we come to the final item on today's agenda, which is the Park Homes Pitch Fee Review 2024 Park Homes Policy, which is Claire and Sam. Whoever wants to go first.
Morning. Yes, you got me this morning. So the purpose of this report is to make recommendations regarding the Park Homes Pitch Fee annual review, and also introduce a recommendation regarding a Park Homes policy consultation. The first part of the report concerns the annual pitch fee review and highlights that Portsmouth City Council are the owners of 2 residential park home sites, Cliffdale Gardens and Henderson Park. Residents of the sites are owner-occupiers and they rent their pitch from the council. Residents of these sites are required to pay a pitch fee as a rental charge, as per the agreement they hold with the council, allowing them to keep their home on the site. The fee covers the council's cost in running the site, including things like repairs and maintenance. Legislation and the signed agreement with each resident allows the council to review their pitch fees on an annual basis, and that must be done on the review date specified in the written agreement, which is the 1st of April. Historically, that would have been done usually in line with retail price index. However, a change in legislation in 2023 means that going forward, fees can only be increased to consumer price index, which is typically a lower rate. Any costs the council incurs in running the sites must be recovered by the pitch fee income. The applicable rate for the increase is the January CPI rate of 4%, as this will be the most recently published figure 28 days before the review date in March 2024, which is when the council must legally notify residents in writing of the increase. As shown in the report, this represents an average weekly increase of roughly £1.70 per unit per week, or £88.40 per year. This revenue must cover the council's increasing costs in running the sites, such as staff salaries, repairs and maintenance, site upkeep and water rates. Any additional or unforeseen spend cannot be recouped through any other means. As mentioned in the report, the January CPI rate of 4% is approximately in line with the council's expected internal rate of inflation. So to continue to meet our costs, officers have not recommended an increase of less than 4%. This will help avoid any budget pressures and offset against the council's increasing costs. The second part of the report relates to a proposed Park Homes policy consultation where officers are seeking to consult for 4 weeks with residents of Cliffdale Gardens and Henderson Park. The purpose of the consultation will be to gather the views of residents on key areas within the policy to shape any final document. It is proposed that the consultation will include a paper and online survey in addition to a residents' forum midway through the consultation. Primarily, the policy does not change any existing rules or requirements for officers managing or residents living on the Park Home sites in any way, and the intention of the policy is to give clarity and transparency to both current and new Park Home residents, covering common day-to-day matters such as rules and standards concerning building works, guidance around buying and selling a park home, and information relating to council services provided on the sites. Again, this doesn't vary or change existing rules on the site in any way and is designed to be an accessible and easy way for residents to understand the rules and requirements on site. There is no statutory requirement to consult on that policy, but officers recommend we do so in order to gather residents' feedback to shape any future document. So therefore, to summarise, it is recommended that the Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness increases Park Home pitch fees in line with CPI from the 1st of April 2024 by 4%, and that an annual report be brought for decision before each pitch fee review. Officers also recommend that he instruct officers to carry out the consultation starting the 1st of March, and that officers bring back a report on its findings to provide further recommendation on the policy's implementation, and finally that he reconfirm the current policy of not charging any sales commission. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Residents Consortium colleagues, any questions or comments on this one?
No, nothing to say.
Trevor? Okay. Ray?
No, I'm fine on this one.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry, I do apologise. I'm fine on this one, thank you.
Okay, that's all right, that's okay. I like that. That's always good. Cal?
Yep, all sounds reasonable to me, so no further comment.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, and the important thing for me is point 4, because it's very easy for people to feel, particularly as we're consulting in March, which will include part of the pre-election period, that somehow this will mean that we will charge any sales commission. That is not happening. Just for people online, we normally go within a budget that is a separate budget that comes out of people's rents. This budget is linked to the main council tax budget, and so forms part of the package that the 3 groups in here and our Labour colleagues agreed to at the full council meeting earlier this month. So it's a different pot of money, which is why it has to be done differently. But on that basis, I'm happy to approve the 4 recommendations, Alison, which means, therefore, the formal meeting is closed at 12 minutes past 11. Thank you very much indeed.